والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبروا تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامدي كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده، الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يده، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما، إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير مع حاجة بي إليه عظيمة، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي وصفحك عن ظلمي وسترك على قبيح عملي وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي أطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجب منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك وأريتني من قدرتك وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أبطأ عني عتبت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي أبطأ عني وخير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك علي يا رب. إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجائل وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح ديان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالق الإصباح ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعاضده، قهر بعزته الأعزاء وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أناديه ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني وبهجة مونقة قد أراني فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه ولا يغلق بابه ولا يرد سائله ولا يخيب آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاصم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وعمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصلي على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين وصلي على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصلي على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وحفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له أبدلوا من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به، وانصره وانتصر به، وانصره نصرا عزيزا، وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم اظهر بي دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله، وتذل بها النفاق وأهله، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المم به شعثنا، واشعب به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وأعزز به ذلتنا، وأغني به عائلنا، واقض به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وأعطنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وأعطنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وكثرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآله، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله، وبضر تكشفه، ونصر تعزه، وسلطان حق تظهره، ورحمة منك تجللناها، وعافية منك تلبسناها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل اللهم على محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل.
صل على محمد وآل محمد. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I welcome you all on behalf of Muhibban al-Mahdi, and I thank you all for coming for the past few nights. So inshallah we'll start off with the majlis followed by salah and there will also be iftar. So I do encourage everyone to stay till the end. So can you please recite our reciter, Brother Bilal Rizvi with a loud salawat.
رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين الصراط المستقيم صراط أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد يكون الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ثم لا تسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Whenever there's a craft that a person carries out, you find eventually they'll reach a stage where they come to the perfection of that craft. That whatever work you may do, eventually you'll reach a point that you've mastered that art form. In the same way, you find when it comes to the words of the creation, there is a perfection of the words of the creation, and that perfection or that nahj is found within the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. When you examine the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen from the angle of eloquence, you find that the compilation known as Nahjul Balagha begins to show us that the level of the rhetoric of the Imam was at a very unique level. As the Imam himself would say, that kalamul imam imamul kalam, that the words of the Imam are the leaders of all words with amongst the creation. And this is why in tonight's majlis, I'll begin to analyze and examine this book known as Nahjul Balagha from a number of different angles. That when you look at this book, Nahjul Balagha, you find that there is one reality towards this book. The reality is that although there are multiple different subjects found within the book, for example, for those interested in child development, there is the letter of the Imam to his son, Imam al-Hassan. Now, although the Imam is writing towards Imam al-Hassan is infallible and ma'soom. That is a lesson for us. For those who are interested in the cosmological system of the world, you find the Imam has sermons about the creation of the world. Those who are interested in communication and social administration, you find the Imam has his letter to Malik al-Ashtar. You find people within this world, we have different interests. There are different things which attract us about the religion of Islam. But at the end of the day, no matter which angle we are coming from, we end up at the door of Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi. You know, oftentimes when we look at Nahjul Balagha, what we end up doing is we open the book, we go to the first sermon, we begin to see Amir al-Mu'mineen talking about the Tawheed and the attributes of Allah. We close the book, say it's not for us. But you find there are different ways to approach Nahjul Balagha. Another approach to Nahjul Balagha is a thematic approach to Nahjul Balagha. That instead of going cover to cover, you begin to examine subject by subject looking at the index, something which our minds are more accustomed to in today's 21st century society. But you find another way is this, is that instead of going towards the beginning, because when you look at Nahjul Balagha, you find it's divided into 3 sections. That there are 240 sermons, or 239 or 241, depending which version you have, because one is divided into 2, or 2 come together into 1 from amongst the sermons. You find there are 240 sermons. There are 79 letters, and there are 480 short sayings of the Imams. What the ulama have said, that if you can't go and comprehend the sermons directly, start with the short sayings of the Imam near the end. Because although those sayings are short, you find the wisdom within it is profound. And it accustoms the mind to begin to understand the thinking of Amir al-Mu'mineen. For example, the Imam, he says in those short sayings, the first of those short sayings, he says, Kun fil fitnati kabnil laboon. It says, be at the time of discord like the child of a camel, that it doesn't have a back strong enough to be ridden upon, nor does it have udders to where it can be milked. You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen, even though it's a small saying, he's giving us a profound lesson today. That child, that baby camel, when there is a disturbance going on, it's useless in that situation. It can't be ridden upon, nor can it give milk. This is something, an allegory which is coming towards us. How many false and useless disputes do we see within the world today that are dividing the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam? Of course, a discussion between haq and batil is something else. But a useless dispute is something else. You find Amir al-Mu'mineen, he continues. Within these short sayings, he says that live amongst the people in such a way that when you die, they weep over your death. When you're alive, they crave your company. That the followers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, they're able to attract people towards them. So you begin to see that although these sayings are short, they're beginning to accustom us to the thinking and the level of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. And what level was this individual have? That although in history there were people who disputed his political position, but there was not anyone who disputed the ilm and the fasahat and the eloquence of the Imam. That, you know, Abdul Hamid Katib was one of the most famous non-Shia writers, that within the time period of the Umayyads and later on, his works were one of the most famous of works. They said, "Oh Abdul Hamid Katib, that where did you learn to write like this?" Abdul Hamid Katib replies by saying, I memorized just 70 sermons of Ali ibn Abi Talib. After I memorized those 70 sermons, you would find that my words, they would begin to sew and sew and sew together. That sometimes, you know, when you memorize the kalam of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and you memorize and read their works, even if it's just one paragraph, even if it's just a couple lines, you'll begin to see barakah and blessing come into your life, because this is the kalam of that Ahlul Bayt. You know, they come to Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi. They say, "Oh Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, my child has become sick. Can you give a dua?" Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi says to the lady, "Go and bring me water." When the lady brings water towards Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, he puts his finger within the water. She says to him, "What are you doing? I asked you to make a dua for my child." She says, "Don't you know that these fingers have written thousands of the hadith of Ahlul Bayt? That if Allah hasn't honored these fingers to the point that they can give shafa'at, then what has Allah given towards me?" You see, this is the power of the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen, that on eloquence it has its level, even in terms of knowledge it's unmatched. You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the famous lines, "Saluni, saluni, qabla an tafqiduni." Ask me before you lose me, for I know the path of the heavens more than the path of the earth. That this Imam who knew the reality in every subject, not just the religious law. You know, an individual, a Jewish man, he comes to the Imam. He says, "Can you give me a number between 1 and 10 that if you divide this number by each of those numbers, they would divide perfectly without anything being left over?" The Imam says 2,520. The man, he looks at the Imam. He says, "How did you do it this quick?" The Imam replied by saying that all of those numbers in the Arabic, that if they have the letter Ain within them, if you multiply them together, they equal this number. That within Arabic, the number 4, Arba, has the letter Ain. You find the number 7, Sab'a, has the letter Ain. You find Tis'a, the number 9, has the letter Ain. You find what? Ashra, the number 10, has the letter Ain. When you do 4 times 7 times 9 times 10, Amir al-Mu'mineen, on the spot without thinking, he gives that number. Now I'll give you one more example about the knowledge and the vastness of the knowledge of the Imam. A man comes up to the Imam. He says, "I have 17 camels. I want to divide them in such a way that my eldest son gets 1/2, the next son gets 1/3, and the final son gets 1/9. But you find the fraction, it doesn't add up because I have 17 camels." Amir al-Mu'mineen, on the spot, he says, "I will give you one of my camels. This is 18 right now." He says, "1/2 for your eldest son, give him 9. He says 1/3 for your next son, give him 6. That's 15 right there. And you said 1/9 for your final son, give him 2. That's 17. He says, divide it up. Now give me my camel right back towards me." You see, Amir al-Mu'mineen, how many different realities and subjects does the Imam have? That even when a man comes up to the Imam, he says, "Oh Imam, we know within our law that if the fish, it dies within water, it is not permissible to eat the fish. But if you take the fish out of water, it's permissible to eat it. In front of me is a fish right now. How do I know if it died in the water or outside of the water?" The Imam says it's very simple. Go and bring a container. In that container, put water. If it stands straightward, you know it died outside of the water. If it lays flat upon its stomach, then you know it died in the water. Because if it's standing straightward and out of the water, it drank air into itself and it died. Whereas if it was in the water, it put water into itself and it died. That this is the realities of that man. That not only did he have knowledge, but he had eloquence to explain that knowledge. This is that individual. His knowledge would come from the Lawh Mahfuz and that divine tablet. Then you know another incident before I get into Nahjul Balagha. Jabir bin Abdullah al-Ansari, he walks into the mosque. When he walks into the mosque, Amir al-Mu'mineen was about to lead prayer. He goes through the lines. He says, "Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, I've seen something strange within my dream. Can you tell me the interpretation towards it?" Amir al-Mu'mineen says very well. He says, "Oh Jabir, what have you seen?" He says, "I saw 7 things that one after another, they would come into the dream like a picture frame going through different aspects. One after another." The Imam says, "Oh Jabir, what did you see?" Jabir, he says, "The first thing that I saw, that there was a beautiful piece of velvet cloth." In that time period, cloth was very valued, even more than gold. He says there was a beautiful piece of cloth, and there was a caller who would call out and say, "Come and take this cloth." But instead of taking the entire cloth, you would find that people would come with scissors and they would only take a part of the cloth. He says, after that, the vision changed. After that, I saw two bird cages. I would hear sounds coming out of those cages. But when I got near those cages, they were empty. He says, after that, the vision, it changed. I saw a third thing. The third thing, I saw a pool or a well from the distance. It was a beautiful well. But when I came closer, the water was very polluted and dirty in it. He says, after that, the vision, it changed. The fourth thing I saw is that I was on a farm. There were healthy, nourished cows. There were skinny, malnourished cows. But instead of milking from the nourished cows, the people were going towards the weakened cows. I didn't understand this. Then he says what? He says the fifth thing I saw is that there were a group of sick people and a group of healthy people. But instead of the healthy visiting the sick would visit the healthy. He says the sixth thing I saw was that there was a creature with two heads, and it would eat from both heads, and it would eat, and it would eat, and it would eat, but its stomach wouldn't fill up. Then Jabir says, my vision, it came to the seventh of the final visions. I saw two pools. One was of copper, one was of gold. There was a man who would stand in the middle. He would take water out of the one from the copper, and he would put it into the one to the gold. And he would do it over and over and over, to the point that I would think that how much water is in the one with copper that he keeps removing from it, yet it doesn't increase, and how big is the one with gold that he keeps putting into it, yet it doesn't increase. Now imagine you're being asked to explain a dream at this level. Amir al-Mu'mineen, the one who has ilm ladunni, the one who has this divine knowledge, he says, O Jabir, what you have seen is not just a useless dream. He says, O Jabir, you have seen a vision of Akhirul Zaman, of the end of times. And O Jabir, after I tell you each of these interpretations, know that when you begin to see this within society, that the coming of my son Mahdi, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, that the coming of my son Mahdi is very near. He says, O Jabir, as for the first dream with the cloth and the caller saying take the entire cloth, yet people would only take parts with the scissors. He says, O Jabir, this represents the religion of Islam in Akhirul Zaman, that Allah has said, come and take this religion. But instead of accepting this religion as a total package, people will only take the bits and parts that benefit them, and they'll neglect the rest. That how often do we see this happening today? That those parts that benefit us, but those parts that are difficult, we neglect. He says the second thing, O Jabir, that when you saw those bird cages with the sound, and when you got close to them, they were empty. They said, O Jabir, that in Akhirul Zaman, whenever somebody will be given an amanat or a trust, they will say that we have character, and we have character, and we have honor. But O Jabir, when you examine those individuals, they'll be empty from the inside. Then he says, O Jabir, the third dream with the pool, which was beautiful from the distance, but when you got close, it was polluted. He says, O Jabir, in Akhirul Zaman, this will represent some of the scholars, not all, some of them, that from a distance they'll look beautiful, but when you examine them closely, in reality they'll be polluted, for they don't practice upon that knowledge. He says the fourth thing, O Jabir, when you saw that dream where the weak cows were being milked instead of the nourished cows, O Jabir, it represents the state of governance within Akhirul Zaman. Look at the foresight of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says it represents the state of governance in Akhirul Zaman. That instead of taxing the wealthy, you would find that there will be an increase in taxes upon the poor. That don't we see a system that's making the wealthier even wealthier, that's making the poor even poorer, and a middle class is beginning to disappear all across of the world? You find Amir al-Mu'mineen is alluding towards this reality, the ilm of the Imam. Then he says, "O Jabir, the next dream when you saw the sick were visiting the healthy instead of the other way around. In Akhir Zaman, those who have wealth, they won't go towards the poor, yet the poor will have to go and beg them and go to the rich themselves." Then he says, "O Jabir, the next thing where you saw the animal with two heads and it would eat and it would eat and it wouldn't fill." He says, "O Jabir, in Akhir Zaman, this represents the state of society, that a human being in Akhir Zaman, he won't care whether his source of income is from halal or it's from haram. He'll take from both and he'll take and he'll take, yet he will never be satisfied." Then he says, "O Jabir, this final sign, when you see this sign, know that the reappearance of my son is very near when you see this sign. That in the middle, you saw the man taking from copper and he was putting water in the pool of gold." He says, "O Jabir, that man is Malakul Maut. This represents the end of times, that people will be taken from this dunya to the hereafter at such a level that you would begin to think that what is happening?" You see, Amir al-Mu'mineen, this individual, he shows his knowledge at every instant, in every field. And you find in the same way, when it comes to the area of rhetoric and eloquence, Amir al-Mu'mineen, once again, he shows his knowledge. I'll look very quickly through different aspects of Nahjul Balagha. 40, 50 minutes doesn't do justice towards this book. But we can analyze different aspects so we can begin to have a little bit more of a picture of this book. From the first angle, I'll look at what non-Muslims have said about this book, both within the folds of Islam and outside the folds of Islam. From the second angle, we'll look at the question, is that how can we be so confident in the authenticity of Nahjul Balagha? At the end of the day, Sayyid al-Radi wasn't ma'soom. But why do we have so much confidence in this book that after the Quran, the name Nahjul Balagha comes towards our mind? The third level, we'll look at the position of speech and what made the speech of Amir al-Mu'mineen particularly unique. And from the fourth level, we'll examine very quickly some of the diversity that is found within the sermons of Amir al-Mu'mineen, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. You find the reality of Nahjul Balagha is such a reality that we haven't given justice to this book. You know, I remember Shaheed Murtaza Mutahiri, he would give an example. He would say, imagine that when you're in your neighborhood, you see a person every single day. You see their face, you see them walking, you see them sitting, but you never talk to that person. But one day you decide to sit with the person. When you sit with them, you begin to speak. There's a connection with him. You begin to realize you have so much in common. He says, my relationship with Nahjul Balagha was like this, that although I would see it upon my father's bookshelf, I would never pick up the book. But the moment I began to pick it up, I began to realize that the answers to the problems in life were found within this book. And it's not just us who has recognized this, even non-Muslims, those from outside the fold of Ahlul Bayt have recognized this. You know, didn't I mention George Jordak yesterday, how he came to the inspiration to be inspired by Amir al-Mu'mineen. You know, there was another individual by the name of Thomas McKelvin, I believe he lives here in the UK, that he's a professor in comparative studies. Even if you go online to Al-Islam, for example, you'll find his works are there, Ghadir in the Bible, Shia Islam in the Bible, a number of subjects. But they said to Thomas McKelvin, that how did you become a Muslim? He replied by saying, I do not believe it is possible for anyone with a pure heart and a good intention and the intention to search for truth to read the Quran and not become a Muslim. Then they said to him, okay, you became a Muslim, But why did you join this minority denomination? Why did you become a Shia? He replied by saying, I also don't believe it's possible for one to read a portion of Nahjul Balagha, not all of Nahjul Balagha, a portion of Nahjul Balagha and not realize that Ali was the successor of Rasulullah. They said to him that now that you become a Muslim, do you want to change your name? He says, I'll keep my name as it is. But if I do change my name, there's only one name I would want, and that name would be Ali Haydar. That is the name that I would want. You find this is a non-Muslim speaking about Nahjul Balagha. George Jordak, I mentioned him yesterday, that he would speak about Amir al-Mu'mineen after reading Nahjul Balagha in such a way that he would say that many leaders in history have been killed because of the severity of their oppression. But Ali ibn Abi Talib is the only leader in history to be killed because of the severity of his justice. The severity of their oppression, it led to their end. But Ali ibn Abi Talib was the only leader in history that it was the severity of his justice. You know, there was a Jewish man, he comes outside of Kufa. He says, I have a problem. Can I speak to a government official? They say to him, why don't you go and speak to the Khalifa himself? He says, I can do that. I'm a Jewish individual. I don't live in Kufa. I can go directly towards the Khalifa. He says, yes, come with me. The man, he takes him. He sees as he's coming closer that there is a man laying upon the ground underneath the tree. The man says to the individual that you see that man is the Khalifa. He says, that is Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Khalifa. Then he says these lines. He says, oh Ali, it is because of your justice that you're able to sit there so comfortably, oh Ali. You see, this is what individuals who are non-Muslims, they see in Amir al-Mu'mineen. Even when you look outside the school of Ahlul Bayt, you find a number of non-Shia have honored Nahjul Balagha, that an individual like Ibn Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili, that when he wants to write a commentary in 20 volumes, he writes a commentary on Nahjul Balagha. Within this commentary, he says that when I'm reading the words of Ali, I come to the realization what? That they are fawqa kalam al-bashar wa tahta kalam al-khaliq, that they are above the words of the creation, but there are less than the words of the Creator. You find further than that, this Ibn Abil Hadid, he says that when I read this book, it seems as if Allah has given the reins and the ropes of eloquence to Ali ibn Abi Talib, that this man, he doesn't have to go and search for words, but rather words, they come towards him. And it becomes clear to me that he wasn't a product of the society of the time, for in his knowledge, he has more knowledge than Aristotle and Plato. And in terms of social knowledge, he has more knowledge than Socrates. And in terms of bravery, there is no one like this man. The only thing which comes clear to me is that either Allah gave him this knowledge or the Prophet of God gave him this knowledge. You see, a non-Shia is speaking about Nahjul Balagha at this level. But we, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, have we done justice to Nahjul Balagha? That if a non-Shia is appreciating this book like this, us who claim that we've hold on to the rope of Allah, which is Amir al-Mu'mineen, have we done justice towards this? Those who've held on to that biggest blessing which has been given. You know the Quran, it says, ثُمَّ لَا تُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّئِيمِ, that verily, verily upon that day they will be asked about the biggest blessing. You know, when you look at the grammatical structure of this word, لَا تُسْأَلُنَّ, you will be asked, it has the lam of taqeed and it has the noon of taqeed. It has the lam of emphasis and it has the noon of emphasis. That there is some question that Allah will say, verily, verily, you're going to be asked about this. There is no way out of this question. They go to the sixth Imam. They say, what is this na'im? What is this greatest blessing? The Imam says, what do the people say? They reply by saying, some people say it's food. Some people say it's drink. The Imam Imam replies by saying that if there is a gathering and the host is generous, but after giving towards the people, he stands at the door, he asks, how much did you drink? How much did you eat? What would you say about his generosity? The man says, I would say he wasn't generous, because generosity means to give no strings attached. I'm saying it in my own words. The Imam says, then if that is what you say about a regular person, Allah is Saqiyul Asqiya. He is the generous of the generous. He says the greatest blessing in the Quran, Na'im, is not food nor is it drink. It is the wilaya of us Ali Muhammad. It is the wilaya of us Ali Muhammad, that you were given a blessing like wilaya. Did you do justice to the blessing of wilaya? You find this is one aspect of doing justice, to have ma'rifat of these individuals. You find in another individual that, for example, he says that it becomes clear to me that Ali is the Imam of the Fusaha. He is the leader of the eloquent. You know, there was a famous scholar within Egypt within the past century. When they were introducing him, they gave him such a long introduction, this title and that title. But at one point within the introduction, they said to him that he is Amirul Bayan, that he is the master of that rhetoric and speaking. When he gets up, he goes on the pulpit, non-Shia audience, he says to them that you call me Amirul Bayan, but there's only one man in my eyes who's Amirul Bayan, and that is Amirul Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. So this is the words of the Imam. But I come to the second phase of the discussion, is that if we say Nahjul Balagha, Syed al-Radi, how can we be so confident in a book which was not compiled by a ma'soom? You know, Sahifa Sajjadiyah, it was written by the Imam. Risalatul Hukuk was written by the Imam. But Nahjul Balagha was just a compilation. The Imam didn't write the sermons. The Imam, he gave the sermons. You find number one, it starts by understanding who Sayyid al-Radi is. Sayyid al-Radi was in the 5th generation from the 7th Imam, Imam Musa al-Qadim, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Even today, he's buried within Qadmain. But this Sayyid al-Radi, you find his teacher was Shaykh al-Mufid. One night, Shaykh al-Mufid, he sees within his dreams that Fatimatul Zahra comes towards him, that in one side of her is Imam Hassan, the other side is Imam Hussein. When he sees this, he becomes perplexed. He says, "Oh Bibi, oh lady, why have you come to me?" She says, "Oh Sheikh, teach my 2 children." That day, Sheikh Mufid, he wakes up, he begins to cry. He says, "Who am I and who are the sons of Zahra? What audacity do I have to teach the sons of Zahra? What mistake did I make that I am seeing this dream?" He says, he says that upon that day, I saw a lady who was from the Sadat, was wearing the same thing which Zahra was wearing. She comes up, one child on one side, one child on the other. She says, "Oh Sheikh, teach my children." Who were those children? One of them was Sayyid al-Radi, the compiler of Nahjul Balagha. The other was Sayyid al-Murtada, the brother of Sayyid al-Radi. That if you want to know the status of Sayyid al-Radi, I'll mention, but even his brother Sayyid al-Murtada, there's a famous incident between him and Shaykh al-Mufid. One day, Shaykh al-Mufid comes to Sayyid al-Murtada. He says, "You know that saddle which you sit upon, that saddle is najis." Sayyid al-Murtada says, "It's not najis." Shaykh al-Mufid says, "I'm your teacher." He says, "It's not najis." Why? He says, "If that saddle was in your possession and you told me it's najis, it would be najis. But because it's in my possession, there needs to be 2 witnesses. You are only one witness, and there is no other witness." Sheikh Mufid says, "I disagree with this ruling, that they're student teacher, but they're disagreeing with each other." They said, "Very well, we'll go to the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. We'll put this discussion, we'll put it in writing into the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen." That this story is famous amongst the ulama of Najaf, that when they go over there, they put it within the writing into the haram. They begin to pray to Allah. The next morning when they come to the haram, you find a reply had come in a written form from the Zari of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That reply, it said, Ash-Shaykhu mu'tamadi wal-haqqu ma'a waladi. It says the Shaykh is respected, referring to Shaykh Mufid, that he's still he's respected, but the haqq and the right, it belongs to my son, referring towards Sayyid al-Murtada. That this is the status of Sayyid al-Murtada. And what is the status of Sayyid al-Radi? That Sayyid al-Radi was one of the greatest Arabic linguists to ever pass. That his focus was in Arabic adabiyat, within the literature, within the eloquence of the Arabic language. That's why when those who make an attack against Nahjul Balagha, they say that Nahjul Balagha does not have chains or asnad. It doesn't have a chain of narrators for the sermons, thus it's invalid. There are a number of replies that you can give. Number one, the first reply is that the focus of Sayyid al-Radi was not upon the chain of narrators. Sayyid al-Radi was a linguist. He wasn't a scholar who focused mainly upon hadith. He studied, of course, but his focus was upon linguistics. That's why when he compiles Nahjul Balagha, he compiled those sermons of the Imam which were the most eloquent. Even when you look at the title isn't like any other book of hadith. It's a unique title, Nahjul Balagha, the peak of rhetoric. So you find this is the first answer. And from the other angle, a number of scholars, they've written books called Asnad Nahjul Balagha, that they would go to the primary sources, they would extract the chain of narrators, and they would put it upon each sermon. But you find the second level, that what can we know to show us how authentic Nahjul Balagha is by looking at how meticulous Sayyid al-Radi was with the compilation of Nahjul Balagha. You know, when you read Nahjul Balagha, right, you find that oftentimes there are gaps within the sermon. Wherever there are gaps within the sermon, Sayyid al-Radi would write wa minha from the sermon. That he kept a lot of integrity. He didn't say this is the entire sermon. He would say this is from the sermon. And oftentimes, the portion before and after the gap are completely different subjects. If Sayyid al-Radi had concocted Nahjul Balagha, if he had written it by himself, you would find that this minha would not be there. There would be consistency between the subject matter. There would be consistency in the sermons as well. From a third angle, you find what? From a third angle, you find in Nahjul Balagha, Sayyid al-Radi would write his commentary on some of the sayings. Sayyid al-Radi was a poet. But if you compare the level of the Arabic of Sayyid al-Radi to the level of the Arabic of Amir al-Mu'mineen, you'll begin to realize there is a night and day difference between Sayyid al-Radi and Amir al-Mu'mineen. For Amir al-Mu'mineen is the one who divided Arabic grammar, that when there is ism, fail and harf, Amir al-Mu'mineen is the divider of the language. That when they say to Amir al-Mu'mineen that many people are reciting the Quran incorrectly, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he puts the dots upon the letters. You know, afterwards, they come to Ali. They say, "Oh, Ali, now that the dots are within the letters, is it possible for anyone to give a sermon without the dots, to write a sermon without the dots?" Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "Forget writing. I will give you the sermon right now." He gives that sermon without the dots. Then they come at a different occasion. They say, "Oh, Ali, what is the most common letter in the Arabic alphabet?" He says the letter Alif. They say, "Is it possible for a sermon to be without the letter Alif?" Amir al-Mu'mineen, on the spot, he gives the sermon. You know, when we sit on this mimbar, we prepare, we sit upon this mimbar. Imagine if somebody comes up to you, they say, "Can you give a sermon without the letter A?" And not only do we want it in writing, we want it right now. This is the reality of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So you find at the third level, there is a difference in the level of Arabic of Sayyid al-Radi and Amir al-Mu'mineen. At the fourth level, you find what? At the fourth level, you find that Sayyid al-Radi did not need to find these sermons. He wasn't doing anything new. You find that within the earlier time periods, that the sermons of Amir al-Mu'mineen were already famous amongst the people. If Sayyid al-Radi was concocting these sermons in Baghdad, which was the center of learning at that time, the scholars, they would immediately know that he had concocted this. But Mas'udi, the famous historian, says that there were 480 sermons of Amir al-Mu'mineen that were famous amongst the people. You know, people, they say that how do we have these sermons today? You know, there was a companion by the name of Harith Hamadani. That this incident, Shaykh al-Suduq, he narrates this in Kitab al-Tawheed, that Amir al-Mu'mineen gave a sermon about the sifat and the attributes of Allah. The companions, they liked this sermon so much, they wanted to memorize it. So they go to Harith Hamadani, they say, "Oh Harith, you are a confidant of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Have you memorized the sermon?" He says, "I don't just memorize the sermons. Whenever he gives the sermons, I sit there and I write it." You find Harith Hamadani would give these sermons towards other individuals and they would pass them on, so there was a chain. The final level, which I'll examine before I conclude upon two more points, is that the next and final proof for the authenticity of Nahjul Balagha is that no one attacked the credibility of Nahjul Balagha for the first 250 years after its compilation. Nahjul Balagha is compiled in the year 400 AH. Sayyid al-Radi dies 406 AH. The first 250 years, Muslim, non-Muslim, Shia, non-Shia, nobody attacks the authenticity of Nahjul Balagha. The first individual who questions the authenticity and the credibility of Sayyid al-Radi was a man 250 years later by the name of Ibn Khalaqan. And you know how he does it? He does it in one of the most weakest of ways. He says, "I have heard some people say that Nahjul Balagha is not authentic and Sayyid al-Radi, he wrote the sermons." Not I heard scholars say. Not I heard the people of rhetoric say. Imagine over here that with your group, you've been studying a textbook for 100 years. I come from America just one day. I come to you, I say, "I think your book is unauthentic." What would you say to me? Maybe you would believe me, but at the very least, you would say he's not confident that our scholars have given this book. All of a sudden, one day, he just says, "I think it's unauthentic." You find 100 years later, this idea, Dahabi, he takes this idea. That is when people begin to openly question Nahjul Balagha. But for the first 250 years, you find it was a source of guidance, not only in Islamic knowledge, but in how to use the tongue for a human being. You see, this tongue is something the Imam would say, the weight of this tongue is small, but its power, it's devastating. That wasn't it at the order of this tongue that an atomic bomb is dropped? Isn't it at the order of this tongue that communities are destroyed? You know, the fourth Imam would say about the rights of the tongue is that to know that your intellect, it hides behind the tongue. That what you have within your head, what connects the inside world to the outside world, is this tongue of a human being. You know, I remember there was a scholar. They said to him, "Go and give a tafsir of the Quran." He said, "Very well. How long do you want me to give the tafsir? 1 hour, 30 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute?" They begin to laugh at him. They say, he says, "Why are you laughing at me?" They reply by saying, "How can you give a 1 minute tafsir of the Quran?" He says, "How can I give it? Watch me right now." He goes up to the mimbar. He says, Allah within the Quran says, speak in 6 ways. Number 1, qawlan maysura, speak kindly towards people. He says, qawlan sadida. He says, speak straight towards people. He says, qawlan layyana, speak leniently towards people. He says, qawlan karima, speak honorably towards people. He says what? He says, qawlan ma'rufa, speak good towards people. And he says, qawlan karima, speak honorably towards people. Sadaqallahu al-aliyul adeem. That you find the Quran in so many different ways. It emphasizes how to speak. But if you want to look at the practical example of eloquence, you see the beauty of the eloquence of Amir al-Mu'mineen is this, is that when you think what makes a person eloquent, what makes him eloquent is that number 1, he doesn't waste his words. He doesn't speak about useless subject matters. Number two, he doesn't repeat the same words. He uses different words unless it's for emphasis. And at the third level, there is a flow to his words. You look in Nahjul Balagha, take snippets of these sermons. You'll find that not only are they Nahjul Balagha in terms of eloquence, but in terms of ilm as well. Amir al-Mu'mineen in one sermon, he says that look at the ant, look at its body, look how its legs uphold the body, that it takes its food upon the back and it stores it within that grain, within that area to carry the grain, that in the summer it prepares for the winters. Then Amir al-Mu'mineen says it's a lesson for us that in the time of our strength prepare for our weakness. That the ant in the summer, it prepares for the winter. In the time of strength, it prepares for the weakness. You know, people, they ask about spirituality. This is spirituality. That even when you're living within the world, you're reflecting upon God and you're beginning to take lessons from this. This is why the Quran says, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا فاقنا عذاب النار. That there are individuals that they remember Allah standing and sitting and upon their sides, and they reflect upon the creations of the heavens and the earth, and they say, oh Allah, you did not create this in vain, and save us from the punishment of the fire. The reality, you find Amir al-Mu'mineen is that individual. Every aspect he remembers Allah. No, you want to look at a different sermon. I'm speaking fast on purpose. We're running out of time as well. You look at another sermon. Muawiyah, he writes to the Imam. He praises his own ancestors. The Imam, he says that you're going to compare your forefathers to our family. He says there are individuals who on the day of Uhud they were killed, but it was our uncle Hamza who became Sayyidul Shuhada. He says there were other individuals, their arms were cut, but it was my brother Jafar who was given the title At-Tayyar. It goes to show that the status of Ahlul Bayt is something given by God, that others they did the same act, but there was something that separated them and Ahlul Bayt. Then he says, oh Muawiyah, you are boasting towards me? No, that sword which I used to kill your forefathers in Badr and Hunain, I still have that sword with me today, O Muawiyah. And he says, O Muawiyah, even when a lion becomes old, a lion, remains a lion, O Muawiyah. That don't look at my age. A lion, he remains a lion no matter what age he's at. He doesn't eat grass. His prey, it remains the same. Look at how Amir al-Mu'mineen is speaking. And a different aspect of this sermon, he says what? He says that if you want to know the difference between us Ahlul Bayt and the rest of creation, then know this, that everyone else, when they receive blessings, they receive it through us, Ali Muhammad. But when we get blessings, we gain it directly from Allah. That other individuals, they use the wasila of Ahlul Bayt, but this is that source which is connected with Allah. This is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is Nahjul Balagha. 40-50 minutes doesn't do justice towards this book, but it's an insight in towards this book. It's an insight in towards the realities of this man. You see, I always say that if you want to look at the value of a person, don't always just go directly to the person, but look at what those around the person think of that. There's certain individuals, they leave this world and nothing is impacted. It's as if they were never there. But there are certain individuals, when they're leaving this world, it seems as if the entire world is collapsing. This was the reality of Amir al-Mu'mineen. That when Amir al-Mu'mineen, he was leaving this world, you find not only were his children in a state of mourning, but all of the orphans of Kufa, as I mentioned the narration, that they would come, they would try to bring the milk towards the Imam. The Imam would say, when have I ever taken the right of an orphan? You know, yesterday I've already narrated when the Imam was struck. I narrated the final wasiyah of the Imam. But there is just one more incident. You know, when Amir al-Mu'mineen Mu'mineen was in his final moments. The companions of the Imam, they would sit by the door. The Imam would tell them to leave, but there was one companion by the name of Asbagh. You find Asbagh, Imam Hassan comes out to him. He says, "Oh Asbagh, why aren't you leaving?" Asbagh says that after this day I won't get to see Amir al-Mu'mineen again. I want to see the face of Amir al-Mu'mineen one final time. Imam Hassan, he goes back in. He says, "Oh Asbagh, your master has given you permission." When Asbagh, he goes back, he looks at the Imam. He notices that there was a piece of cloth on the forehead of the Imam, a piece of yellow cloth. He says, Amir al-Mu'mineen had become so pale that I couldn't see a difference between his skin and the cloth. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, "Oh Asbagh, why do you cry? Do you not know that I'm going towards heaven?" Asbagh, he replies, "Oh my master, I'm not crying because you're leaving. I'm crying because of my separation from you. That after this I won't have you again." You know, the Prophet of God would say, "Ana wa Ali abaway hadhihi al-ummah," that me and Ali are the fathers of this ummah upon this day. You find it wasn't just Zainab and Kulthum and Imam Hassan and Hussein who became yatim. You find the entire ummah of the Prophet became yatim and orphaned upon this day. You find Amir al-Mu'mineen after that. He says, "Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah." Amir al-Mu'mineen has passed away. The wasi of Rasulullah has passed away. You find Amir al-Mu'mineen had made one final wasiyah to his children. He said, "Oh my sons Hassan and Hussein, when you lift the janazah from the back, and you'll notice that the front side will lift by itself. That on one side Allah sent Jibreel to lift the janazah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. On the other side He sent Mikael." You find the janazah in the way the janazah of Zahra was lifted in the middle of the night. You find the janazah of Amir al-Mu'mineen is lifted in the middle of the night. The janazah is going until it stops at a spot which the Prophet knew had made for Amir al-Mu'mineen. But I say, "Oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, Jibreel had come, Mikael had come, your children had come. Why don't you look at the 13th of Muharram when your grandson Zainul Abidin, he goes back towards Karbala. He sees 72 bodies scattered upon the ground. They say to him, 'Oh captive, what do we do with these bodies?' He says, 'Build one grave for the companions.' They make one grave for the companions. Then they make a separate grave for Habib ibn Madahir. Then after that they say to him, 'Oh captive, there is a body by the Furat. When we pick one side of the body, the other side it falls down. When we pick the other side of the body, the other side it falls down.' The Imam says, 'That is the body of my uncle Abbas. I'll bury that body.' After that, he says, 'Oh Banu Asad, step back, for only a Masoom can bury a Masoom.' He walks up towards his father's body. He falls at that body. He says, 'Oh father, you don't know what happened after Ashura. What they did to Sakina, what they did to Zainab.' You find the Imam, he puts his abba on the ground. He gathers the pieces of his father. He looks towards Medina. He says, 'Ya Rasulullah, adrikni.' He looks towards Najaf. He says, 'Oh my grandfather Ali, adrikni.' He looks towards Baqi. He says, 'Oh my uncle Hassan, adrikni.' He puts the body in the grave. After he puts the body in the grave, they say, 'Oh captive, there is a body of a youth. What do we do with that body?' He says, 'That is the body of my brother Ali Akbar. Bury that body by the feet of his father.' After that, a voice came from the body of the Imam, 'My child, my child, my baby, my baby.' Imam Zainul Abidin,
He says, oh Banu Asad, where is the body of the 6-month child? You find the Imam puts the body of Ali Asghar on the chest of his father. He closes the grave. He writes on the grave, هذا قبر أبي عبد الله الذي قتل غريبا. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. You know, one of the most difficult moments is when one of your family members passes away and you have to bury the body and you return from burying the body. You know, when Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein were returning, they saw a man on the streets of Kufa. He was crying. They say, oh man, why are you crying? He says, there used to be an individual. He would bring me food every single day. It's been 3 days. I haven't seen that man. I haven't had any food. Imam Hassan says, can you describe that man? He says, he has the same fragrance as you. But whenever I would ask for his name, he wouldn't tell me his name. He would just say, Ghareebun Jalisan Ghareeba. He would say, it's one Ghareeb sitting with another Ghareeb. Imam al-Hasan says, oh man, that was our father. From now on, I'll serve you. But I say, oh Imam, when Imam Zainul Abidin returned to Kufa, Sayyida Zainab says, oh my nephew Sajjad, how did you bury the body of your father? The Imam says, oh my Aunt Zainab, whenever you bury a body, you make sure that the head is facing the Qibla, that the face is facing the Qibla. But what can I say about the body of my father? That there wasn't any head that was... Ya Allah, we ask through the rights of Imam Zainul Abidin, we ask through the rights of Amir al-Mu'mineen, we ask through the rights of that oppressed household, that wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, give help towards them. That wherever they're sick, wherever they are ailing, to help them in these days. Ya Allah, whichever of us has legitimate hajat, Ya Allah, grant it to us upon these nights. Ya Allah, we pray for the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta as-sami'ul alim.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे मैं तलियां मल दी रह गईयां है बोलदा नहीं सजा दे पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे मैं तलियां मल दी रह गईयां है बोलदा नहीं सजा दे पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे ऐस वास्ते कमर झुका टुरदा मेरा इस्तकबाल नहीं सह सकिया जिस वेले दी चादर उतरी ए कदम कदम ते कत्ल होया तेरी नस्ल दवारस गिर गया है, नुआ के होश करा दे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे। पढ़ना दे सुन हो के बाबा उजड़ी दे, खैबर नू चाना सो काहे। ज़ैनब दे नाल शराबी ते दरबार च जाना औखाए। हर जुल्म नू जेड़या सह गया है, बस ओ मज़लूम सजा दे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा नई लाश हुसैन ते रोन दिता। मैं फेर भी बाबा चुप रहिया, कई बार बचाया आबिद नू, खुद आप मैं सहंदी दुख रहिया। बाजार अबूर मैं कर आया, दरबार अबूर करा दे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा नई लाश हुसैन ते रोन दिता। मैं फेर भी बाबा चुप रहिया, कई बार बचाया आबिद नू, खुद आप मैं सहंदी दुख रहिया। बाजार अबूर मैं कर आया, दरबार अबूर करा दे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे। पढ़ना दे मैं तो पुछ बाबा सिर गाजी दा, क्यों नेज़े ते नहीं आंदा है। सिर नंगा वेख के ज़ैनब दा, अब्बास दा सिर गिर जांदा है। बर्दाश्त न गाजी कर सकिया, खुले वाल है धी ज़हरा दे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे। पढ़ना दे मैं तलियां मल दी रह गईया है, बोल नहीं अब्बा से। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब सुन हो के बाबा उजड़ी दे, खैबर नू जाना सो काहे। ज़ैनब दे नाल शराबी ते दरबार च जाना औखाए। हर जुल्म नू जेड़ा सह गया है, बस ओ मज़लूम सजा दे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब मेरी कर बाबा इमदादे। मैं तलियां मल दी रह गईया है, बोल नहीं सजा दे। पढ़ना दे अली ज़ैनब आखे, मेरी कर बाबा इमदाद। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद।